everyone. I'm your host, Joyce Hochsprung, McLeod County Master Gardener. Today in the garden, we're going to mostly talk daylilies, with maybe a little bit about moving peonies, so towards the end. But we're going to start out with how to dig a daylily. I noticed that a couple of daylilies aren't blooming as well, didn't bloom as well this year, so that's kind of telling me, yeah, maybe it's time to divide them and give them some fresh compost in there and let them get started over again. Plus, then I have some to share. So we're gonna pull my name tag out of here so I don't step on it. And then I'm just gonna start out here a little ways away from the plant and start by just loosening the soil. This one looks like it's going to pop out pretty easily. I'm gonna knock some of this dirt off. And we're gonna drop it a few times. There we go. We're gonna take it back over by my table. And I'm gonna set it down here. And before I start any washing off, I'm gonna grab my handy dandy little dividing tool. Now there's a couple ways I could do this. I could take two forks back to back in the middle of the clump and just kind of stick them in next to each other and keep rocking and pulling until it came apart. I can wash off the whole clump and separate it with my hands, which is the gentlest, easiest way on the daylily, but it's also very time consuming. Or I can take this little tool. I'm going to kind of look for a natural spot in here where it looks like it might divide. Stick it in. This one is overgrown, definitely. There we go. Okay. That's one section off. I'm going to grab my snips and cut this back. Do a little cleanup on it. And my kitty's going to help me here. She is so helpful in the garden. And I'm going to see, I've got at least three good-sized fans and a couple small fans. Each of these sections is called a fan. And generally, on a mature fan, each mature fan will throw one scape, which is the flower stem. So when you divide, generally if you buy them potted up, you're usually going to get two fans, or if you buy online and they ship bare root, you're usually going to get two fans. And depending on the size of the daylily and the size of the fan, if I'm potting up, say for the plant sale or something, I'll put 2 to 3 in it, but it depends. I don't want to crowd the roots too much, so I kind of look at the daylily itself. And when dividing, like this would be a nice size start to get you going on a new one. And I'm just going to grab my hose quick and spray off this section. There we go. And now I want to clean off some of this old dead stuff here. It's called crown cleaning. And the crown, as soon as I get a little more of this off, you'll be able to see it more easily, is the white part where the roots join the main stem of the daylily or the scape. And a lot of growers, when they ship them bare root, will actually clean off some of these older leaves. Because when you replant this, the old leaves are going to die and it'll look pretty sickly and yellow. But then the new ones will come growing out from the crown. So if you get some of this off and peel off some of these, one or two of these old, here, take this one off the outside, you'll see the crown a little better and it'll let the new growth come up better and easier. You don't have to wait as long for the old ones to die before the new ones grow up. So got a little picture here of kind of the parts of the daylily. Okay, this is the scape, the stem that holds the flower. It's called the scape. Up here is a seed pod. This one is set seed. This would be a bud. This is the spent bloom, because each flower only lasts for a day. This is the bloom. We're going to talk a little bit about this part is called the fan because it kind of fans out like a palm, or it looks like a fan. Right down here, this white part is the crown, and here are the roots. Now, if you wanted to do some breeding, and people for some reason think it's a terrifying thing to do, that they don't know how to do it, that's not true. All you're going to do is pinch off one of the stamens, the part with the pollen, and you're going to take it to a different daylily and put it on the pistil. This part that is sticking out here, longer. Usually it's longer than the stamens. The only thing you really need to know is your daylilies, are they diploids or tetraploids? And that's not as complicated as it sounds. A diploid just means it has the normal number of chromosomes, 22, and a tetraploid has double that number, 44. Generally, the two don't cross. So I like to have name tags by all my daylilies, and if I forget if it's a tetraploid or a diploid, I can Google it quickly. I usually have my phone in the garden with me, just for that's one of the reasons, that besides taking pictures. And I can quickly check it. There's a daylily database that all registered daylilies are listed in, and it'll give you the information about bloom time, height, a description, and usually a picture of the color. Some will even talk about some will even say how many buds it sets. So there's a ton of information just in a little area. And yes, you're just so helpful here. So yeah, you look it up, find out if it's a tetraploid, and you take tetraploid to tetraploid or diploid to diploid. Grab my gloves, and we're gonna pull off just a little more on this clump, because this one's going back in for me. I'm not gonna be quite so fussy. If I were potting it up to sell, I'd clean it down a little further. The hose is a helpful tool when you're dividing plants, especially if you happen to be dividing things that are in an area with lots of quackgrass, because you can wash them off cleanly and pick out any quack roots there, because you don't want to put them back in the bed if you can avoid it. And I'm just going to take a quick look. There's a couple of these old roots here that aren't going to do anything. So I'm going to just pull those out because they're going to die anyway, and it's going to put out new roots. So some of these kind of soft, mushy old ones that were decaying we'll just take out of here. There, looks like one more in there. And I have my bucket of compost here. So I'm going to dump a bunch of that in the hole. And work it in a bit. Okay, I'm going to dig out my hole. Now I'm going to build up a mound of soil in the center to set the daylily on. Kind of spread out the roots. I'm a little bit high. I just want the crown covered. Remember that part? I said the white part there, with about 1 inch of soil. That looks about right. So I'm going to start just pushing the soil back in. And then the next thing would be to grab my hose or a watering can and give it a good soaking drink. Really soak it in well. And then keep it moist for a couple weeks, not soggy. First couple years I tried this, I used to try to carry everything with me, and I was dropping things, and I said, there's got to be a better way here. So I looked around and I said, I need pockets. I need an apron with pockets. So this pretty much fits the bill. I have tags in one pocket, and I think that one's empty, but I picked up a bunch of tags of crosses that didn't take, so I just reuse them. I keep an eraser in a pocket. So if I have a cross that didn't take, or at the end of the season when I collect the tags, I just erase the names off of the tag and reuse it. And here I keep my twisty ties, and I'm just starting to learn a little about collecting pollen and freezing it and saving it for next year. I did a little bit last year. I'm learning a little bit more, so I'm no expert on it, but basically what I do, what I'm told, and what I did with the ones that I did do, tear a cotton ball apart, stick it in the side like a little centrifuge tube or something, pack it in there, and then you just put the pollen on there. I use just the little sticky dots on here so I can write what the pollen is from, what plant is the pollen from. Put the cap on and throw it in the freezer. Okay, the very last bloom on So Beautiful to me. It'd be better if it was a little bit fluffier, but I think it'll still work. If you can kind of see the pollen on here, you want it to be nice and fluffy. Now this one I have found does not accept pollen easily and set pods very well. I have a really tough time getting this one to set pods, but the pollen from it makes some really pretty babies. So we're going to go over here to Guard Your Heart and put some pollen on it. Now usually it takes about 45 days for the pod to ripen seeds from the time you pollinate it. So we're past mid-August, so I'm really kind of pushing the limits here today. And what will probably happen is some of the last crosses that I've made in the last week or so and today, I will probably end up picking the stem, the scape, before there's a hard frost, and bringing it in the house and just putting it in water for a week or so while the pods finish ripening. So I'm going to come up here. I've got the pollen on here, and we're going to just take this. Here's the pistil. And we're going to just take that and dab the pollen on the end of the pistil. Now that's pollinated, and within a couple days you should be able to see a little bump right down here at the base if the cross took. Here are some others that I did earlier. This is a fairly young plant, so I haven't put a lot of crosses on it yet. I'm going to write the name, and you always write the pod parent first. So this is the one that I want to set pods. This is Guard Your Heart. So I'm just going to write Guard Your Heart times So Beautiful to Me is the pollen parent, the one we took from over there. And then I'm going to slip this twisty tie around here. Twist it around. And then I know what cross I made on this flower. And when the pods start to turn brown and crack open, I start to see a crack along them, or even if they're just partially brown and they're starting to crack open, I'll pick them off along with a tag, and I'll stick them like in an egg carton with their tag and let them finish drying. Then I'll open them up, let them dry for a day, put them in a little envelope with their names on them, the cross, and I stick them in a baggie in the refrigerator until about January when I start my seeds. And I think we'll take a little walk out to the seedling bed. Here in my weed patch, I decided I needed some more space for daylily seedlings, so all of these in here were planted in June from plants that I started in January and February. I start them inside, put them under lights until about April when I need the space for tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, and then they just get moved in front of the south window until it's warm enough that I can start setting them outside for a few hours at a time. And that's how I do those. So most of these I'll see a little bit of bloom next summer. You don't always see their true colors the first summer, the first bloom period, but you get an idea. Some of them you look at and go, ooh, but if sometimes it's not until their second or even third year of blooming that you really see what they can do. So you have to have patience. Definitely patience is a virtue when it comes to daylilies, and all perennials for that matter. And we'll go on over to my older seedling bed. This one is one of my favorites so far. I like this one. This one has what they call diamond dusting on it, where it looks kind of glittery, which is a little different than a glitter edge. But that's kind of a fun one. I like this one a lot. It's got a good bud count, a long bloom time. So I think probably next year I'll play the name game on Facebook with people, where I give people a chance to submit names, and then I draw one, and every name I draw gets a couple fans of the plant. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. That's another one that's kind of a fun one. About a third of the blooms, this is its second year blooming, last year was its first, and about a third of the blooms this year were doubled. Neither of those that are open today are, but that was kind of fun. But I see there's still 3 more buds on that other scape, so it might come around. There's a few others in here that are still blooming. Some have possibilities, some will probably go on the compost. Some are nice, but they're either too much like something I already have, or I just don't care for them. They usually go to the city, to the parks department. So that's kind of what I do with my extras. This is kind of a cute one, but we'll see if right now this year it's having issues opening up all the way. So it might end up on the compost, even though I like the flower and it's got a good bud count. If it doesn't open well, that's kind of a fault. But like I said, by next year we'll give it 1 more year and see what it does. That one out there, the tall one, I really like the branching on that one and the way the bud's set, and it's got a good bud count. For me, bud count is one of the top things. If it doesn't have at least 15 buds on a scape, I'm probably not going to keep it. These 2 tall ones both have the same pod parent, but they're from the same parents, but just a little bit different looks on them. So they are siblings. We'll show you this one. It's got a beautiful big flower. It's got a glitter edge on it. Nice size, good bud count, but sometimes it gets real spotty and doesn't open real well. So again, that one will get 1 more year. If it doesn't clean up, it'll probably go to the compost pile. This is one that I'm kind of watching. It's had a pretty long bloom season. The branching is nice and spaced out nicely. Bud count is pretty good. It does have a few issues with some splotching sometimes when it's real humid. So again, we'll wait and see, does it clean up or not. I think that's about it for the daylilies, but we're going to talk a little bit about peonies because it's mid-August and we're getting into peony dividing time, and I'm not going to actually do one, just talk about it a little bit, but we'll go up by the peonies and do that. Sometimes I get questions about peonies, and the one thing I will say is if you're digging a big clump, it's a big job, so I'm not going to dig this one, and then it would take it a couple of years before I'd get back to this strength. But if you were going to dig it, you needed to divide it or move it or whatever, they really don't need to be divided. But say you want to move it or somebody's asked you for part of one, you can just cut it back, go down here to about 4 to 6 inches and cut those back. Anytime kind of between now and mid-September or even late September, if you're really pushing it, you can move or divide them. So cut back the greenery so you can see what you're doing. And if you're going to dig the whole clump, you're going to kind of do like I did with the daylily over there. Work around it, start out a little ways away and just keep digging around and then underneath and little by little. Keep in mind the roots are much more brittle on a peony, so it's a little harder to do. And you want to try to get as much of the peony root and the eyes. You don't want to damage the eyes, so that's one reason you want to stay out a ways from it. And just keep working around and around and around until you get it loosened up and get it out. Sometimes they'll come out in pieces. Sometimes you might get the whole clump. It varies. And then when you divide it, you want to get the dirt off, wash them off, and look for the eyes. And the eyes will be little pink bumps along the stem because every eye is going to throw a stem, which should result in a bloom on a mature peony. So that's what you're going to do. And when you replant them, you don't want the eyes to be any more than an inch below the soil surface, or you're going to probably not get bloom. Don't expect bloom the first year. If you get one or two, great. Some people will just pick them off so it spends that whole season establishing. So do that, and if you're starting with a new one, you want to get as much compost and composted manure worked into that soil as you can, because peonies are heavy feeders, and like I said, you don't have to divide them ever, really. There are peonies on old homesteads that are probably 100 years old and still growing, so they're just fine without it. But if you need to for some reason, make sure you give them a good base to start from. And again, waterman, if you're digging them and dividing to share, you can either pot them up or wrap them in moist, not soggy, but just moist newspaper. You don't want to let those eyes dry out, those little pink eyes. So just keep the newspaper moist until whoever you're giving it to, or you or whatever, replants it. Don't let them dry out. And then give them a good soaking when you plant them. And some people suggest a little mulch the first winter, but then pull it off fairly early in the spring. Because if you have the soil or mulch too deep over the eyes, you're not going to get bloom. We'll take a little walk around and just see some of what's blooming. Okay, this is kind of a fun one. It's one you have to dig in the fall. This is, see if I can remember how to say it, Ornithogalum sonderacei. And it's in the same family as Star of Bethlehem. So you put it in the spring once the soil's nice and warm. Dig the bulbs in the fall, let them dry down. And this one's a little bit trickier to keep than some. It's, you gotta watch it, especially towards spring. It likes to turn soft, so you may have to add a little more. I usually put it in a bag with peat moss and layer it with plenty of peat moss to absorb some of the moisture to keep it dry. These pineapple lilies are just coming into bloom. You can see the blooms down here, and this one is blooming for the first time. I bought it last year and it grew but didn't bloom. So kind of fun. I like the dark leaf on this. Otherwise the blooms themselves aren't that different. A little bit more pink in that one. And these have to be dug also, but these are the easiest things in the world to save. I just throw them in a paper bag, throw some peat moss in them, and I don't even look at them till I'm ready to plant them. Most of the daylilies in here are finishing up. I've got one here that will bloom until frost stops it. It's not the showiest daylily, but it's a spot of color. This one is called Angles of White. I don't know how they named it because I see absolutely no white in this daylily, but like I said, this one will keep going until frost, and you can see the branching on this one and the bud count, and it keeps building buds. There's one that's, not even the size of the tip of my pinky down here. So it's called a bud builder. The scape keeps growing as it goes, and it just keeps going. This one is so far for me an impossible pod parent. I have not been able to set a pod on it ever, but I love the flower and it's got a good bud count. But you know, this one blooms for a long time. This one started in, I think probably early July, so it's been almost a good month now or better. So you know, it's got good bloom power. We're down to the last bloom here on Gypsy Rose, and this one has, let's see if I can get it to show, what we call a glitter edge. It literally looks like there is glitter on the edge. These are, I think we talked about them earlier, Angelica gigas. You can see there's several different bees on here. Sometimes I've counted as many as 5 or 6 different varieties of bees on one head. Here's a couple more that are still blooming. This one is called Oy Vey, and the first bloom opened on this one on June 27th, and it has been in constant bloom since. And this is a 2-year-old plant that I put in last spring. So I've been really impressed with this one. And this one is Gopher Teeth, University of Minnesota colors, and it has definite teeth on the edge. This one is called Fuchsia Rose. This one is a later bloomer, doesn't start until August. So there are daylilies out there for very early in the season, main season, late main season, late, and there are even some that are considered very late, like the one I showed you over by the shed that I said angles of white. That's considered very late, that will go till frost. This one will probably go another week to 10 days. And this is Sophie. Not the showiest, but again, it's some late season color. Over here we have Rudbeckia subtomentosa, or sweet coneflower. This is a variety called Henry Eilers, and it has quilled petals, which is kind of neat. It usually starts blooming right around fair time, county fair time, or a little before, and this one will go through until frost. So this gives you some late season color. This is Prairie Sunset Heliopsis. This is one of the big tall Heliopsis. I like the red stem on it, adds a little color. This is Limelight. It gets nice big heads. Starts out green, if you can see up there at the top, kind of a limeish green, and then it turns to white. This one works really well. It gives you nice long stems if you want to cut them and use them in your winter containers. And it's just a fun hydrangea. It's hard to believe this started out as a 4-inch pot. This one is Zinfin Doll. This was new just a couple of years ago. It starts out kind of white and turns pink as you go. And eventually this one should get 6 to 8 feet. But this is Lilting Bell. She's kind of a pretty one too. These are called, with these kind of a spider type or unusual form. If it's a true spider, the petals would have to be a bit narrower, but then it's classified as what they call it, just an unusual form, and that covers a lot of things. So, and I think that wraps up our day in the garden. See you next time.